At 7:35 this morning, the Vatican announced that Pope Francis has died at the age of 88. Now, this news actually came as a pretty big shock because despite his age, his recent health troubles, and being hospitalized for like 5 weeks, it did kind of look like he was recovering. He was discharged from hospital, and just yesterday, think about that, just yesterday, he was seen blessing huge crowds on Easter Sunday and even meeting JD Vance.
Pray for you every day. God bless you.
I don't want to see one comment. Then just mere hours after that, on Easter Monday, he passed away. Which, I mean, the timing of that, it's pretty miraculous. This morning, bells rang across Vatican City, one for each of the 88 years of Francis's life, and in every corner of the globe, millions are mourning the passing of a pope whose influence reached far beyond the 1.4 billion Catholics that he led. Because people saw Pope Francis in particular as more than just a religious figure. They saw him almost as a global statesman. He was the first pope ever to attend a G7 summit where he warned humans to not let AI get out of control. He was the first Latin American pope and the first non-European in centuries, which kind of made him a bit of an outsider of Rome. And perhaps because of that, he did things very differently to those in the past. He even refused to live in the papal palace. He demanded the end to possession of nuclear weapons, the end to the death penalty. He publicly voiced support for same-sex marriages and condemned anti-gay laws, and also appointed women to top positions of the church. But now, for the first time in over a decade, the Catholic Church has found itself without a living pope. And so, a centuries-old complex process has now been set in motion. And the answer to what happens now is actually surprisingly fascinating, from his funeral process to how do they elect the next pope. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and of course, let's stop the yapping and let's get cracking! Pope Francis has led the largest single religious denomination on earth with 1.4 billion people. And it's a big deal because the Pope inherits enormous responsibility and authority. I mean, this just blew my mind when I heard about it. Pope Francis was the 267th leader of the church in an unbroken line dating all the way back to Saint Peter. Bro, Saint Peter lived 1,995 years ago. Almost 2,000 years to have unbroken the same processes go on for that long is insane. So it kind of goes without saying, but this week is going to be intense. And I mean, just to give you an idea of these, I guess, millennia old processes that they carry out, the rites and rituals, there is an entire, this is just mind-blowing, 400-page book that's only purpose is to guide religious officials through the countless rites and rituals of just the funeral process. That's insane. 400 pages! And apparently it goes down to like the tiniest thing. Like there's even a traditional method to verify that you have to carry out to verify that a pope has died, which is calling the pope's name, their baptismal name, 3 times. And they don't respond 3 times. And then he's like dead. Obviously, 2025. There was a doctor involved, so don't worry. Now, Pope Francis, remember how I said, he was very different to the last? Well, he actually overhauled that 400-page book last year to make it a lot more simple. Now, his reasoning behind the overhaul was he didn't want this massive, meticulous funeral process, because he said he wanted to emphasize that a pope should not be seen as a powerful man of this world, but rather a disciple of Christ. Just 2 of the many changes that he made was that 1, he will no longer be placed in 3 coffins, which is 1 cypress, then the next one is lead, and then the next one is oak. Now he'll just be in a simple wooden coffin with a zinc one inside. But then 2, he also didn't want to be buried in the Vatican like the rest. Rather, he wanted to be in the Basilica of St. Mary Major, which is about half an hour across Rome. Some of these other processes include his fisherman's ring, which will be ceremonially destroyed. Traditionally, that's done to prevent it being used to like forge documents, but now it's also like to symbolize the end of his authority. The Vatican has now officially begun their 9 days of mourning, and in that time, Pope Francis's body will be placed in St. Peter's Basilica, and it will actually be an open coffin, kind of, you can see it. And so tens of thousands of people are expected to file past and pay respect in person. It kind of reminds me of the Queen's funeral. Now, following that, a grand mass will be held at the same basilica, but this time there will be countless world leaders and other top important people, and it'll also be broadcast worldwide. And I've seen some of the pictures of the previous one. Insane amounts of people turn up. Then, 15 to 20 days after the Pope's passing, the intense process of choosing the next Pope will begin. And I say intense because high-ranking officials from the Catholic Church from around the world, known as cardinals, will all make their way to Rome to go into what's called a conclave. Now, this part's pretty cool because the word conclave itself comes from the Latin word cum clave, meaning, okay, with a key. This does have a point. I know. When anyone says, goes into the Latin meaning, I'm like switching off, but I promise you, lock in. So that word is actually a nod to the old practice of locking these Catholic officials away until they made a decision. And that tradition began in the 13th century after one of these elections dragged on for nearly 3 years. And so the people in the town were pissed off and they were like, that's it. So they actually locked the cardinals in, removed the roof, and they said, you're not coming out until you make a decision. And so fast forward to today, the conclaves still have that same sort of spirit of seclusion. They all go inside the Sistine Chapel and they all completely cut off communications from the outside world. There's no phones allowed, no internet, no news. And it's all to ensure that the deliberations and the decisions are guided only by prayer and discussion. There will apparently be around 120 cardinals, and paper ballots are passed to each of them, and they then write the name of their chosen candidate. Once they're done, each cardinal, in order of seniority, let's go with that. They walk to the altar and then they fold the paper up and they place it in a chalice. The votes are then counted and the results are read out. Now the winner basically has to get 2/3 of the votes, which doesn't happen the first time. Now if one of them receives 2/3 of all of the votes, he then becomes the Pope. And I say he because women are not allowed to become popes in the church. It kind of goes without saying, but this normally doesn't happen the first time around. So they're allowed like 4 votes a day. And each time, and this is the important one, each time they burn the ballots. So if a pope hasn't been agreed on with that ballot, they burn it and the smoke turns black. And that comes out a chimney, right? However, if they burn it and then the smoke turns white, that means to the world that a pope has been chosen. So apparently because of this, news companies will literally have their cameras fixed on a chimney in one of the buildings of the Vatican for literally days on this rooftop, just waiting for that white smoke. So I told you, this goes down to like you need maybe a 500-page book for this. And so also traditionally about 30 to 60 minutes after that white smoke is seen, the new pope will appear over on the balcony looking over St. Peter's Square. And then there you have it, your new pope. And I guess you're wondering, why does this matter so much? Well, remember, 1.4 billion people that are Catholics, 2.4 billion Christian. So that's an enormous amount of people on earth where it either really matters or at least somewhat matters who the Pope is. Because again, enormous responsibility, enormous authority. But yeah, that's what happens now over the next coming weeks, and it'll be a big deal. So I'll always keep you updated on here, on my TikTok. Make sure you subscribe. We're trying to hit 1 mil. Also note, this week's roundup of news should have been out today, but it got pushed back because of this video. So, love you, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Woo!